Caddis Maximus here, this time with a review of a classic style 5/8 inch nut splitter. These are, are the iLoop style nut splitters, and they are pretty simple to use. Unfortunately, PowerBuilt used to be a respectable tool company, and then they sold out pretty early on, and then their tools have been pretty rough. We can see the finish on this is just, I mean, it's forged steel, but it's made in China, and you know, they said make it out of good quality, but just as cheaply as possible. So they did forge it, but it's just, you know, such a rough finish. There's actually sharp burrs that are catching me. I mean, these are kind of a disposable tool. You can certainly buy snap-ons and nice ones, but they always seem to get really beat up. They have their issues, like this thick beam and this big eye doesn't really fit in a lot of automotive situations. This is more like a farm use and certain situations where it can be used. But most times, if you can't get like a nut extractor socket or something on there, then you're just using a hammer and a cold chisel. The easiest way to remove a nut. Also, if you are going to use one of these type of splitters, try to use a Dremel and make an initial split. Many times, also with these, if they're really hard nuts, like certain exhaust nuts and things like that, it can even damage the center portion. It just totally beats up the actual cutting anvil. Other than that, they can work okay. One thing is they're not recommended you use an impact wrench with them, but they always seem to work a lot better with the impact wrench. Another thing of note, the way they're designed, it sits flush on one side, but actually it's offset on the other, so it can have more of an even amount of meat there, but it can sit really close when you're actually trying to split the nut. Often a mistake is people will put it on this way, and it won't get all the way down to the bottom. It'll just cut like the kind of the top part of the nut. And the whole idea of this is actually just driving a wedge into the side of it until it cracks it open, so that you can just tap it off with maybe just a punch. But some of the fitment issues on this, so what's amusing is on this packaging here, you know, they say put it on the nut, blah, blah, blah. You turn with a 3/4 inch wrench. We've got a 3/4 inch socket here, indeed, and it just physically doesn't fit. They're using 3/4 inch hot roll hex stock when they machine this, or, you know, it may be alloy steel, but it's still hot roll, so there's a bunch of scale. That scale is so thick it doesn't even actually fit a 3/4 inch socket. 6-point doesn't even fit. I found the metric, this Pittsburgh 19 millimeter, that's a 12-point, and there's enough clearance right at the corners to where it will fit. It's super tight, but that's just, if we can get this to stop focus hunting, that's one of the big issues there. Is it's like, wow, you know, at least make sure that it fits. For people who don't know how these work, let me go ahead and pull this apart. It's actually a pretty simple device. You do want to keep it well lubricated. And so this is just the anvil. There's the screw. It has a ball end. They kind of do this so that when you unthread it, if this anvil is stuck in the nut, it'll actually physically pull it back out. But I've seen where these have issues in there where it galls up. So you want to make sure that you get some oil in there. And then it has this little groove to try to keep it from rocking back and forth too much. Unfortunately, on this one, you can see it's just a grub screw with a sharp point. They didn't even bother to sand the point at all. So this thing wobbles around just a huge amount. Anyway, I'll do a little demonstration on this pulley here. All right, here we are. I have a little aluminum pulley, but virtually you would put it over the end of the nut like so. Get it tightened down, trying to make sure everything is as centered as possible. That's what's always really difficult, is just getting everything nice and even on there, so when you start applying pressure, you actually have some degree of success. It's really easy to get things just a little bit off center, and then they perform dramatically worse if it's not if the load isn't really well centered. Mainly because you start having a whole bunch of friction as this bar is getting, you know, pushed sideways in the bore. Just makes a huge amount of friction and doesn't actually deliver to what you're trying to, doesn't deliver to the nut that you're actually trying to cut. Like right there is actually pretty good. And we'll see how this does. Just holding in my hand. Surprisingly enough, it's the beauty of using an impact with one of these. It's just such a short jolt. Otherwise, it's stabilized via the nut that it's actually against, but you can always use an adjustable wrench and just put it around the body to give it just a bit more stability. Which is what I'm going to do right now. Surprising, those little impact drivers actually hit with quite a bit of force. I would have really had to hammer that because aluminum's just a bit softer, but it was making quite a bit of progress. We're going to see if we can't get this to split if I use a more substantial impact wrench here. Won't be quite so loud. That's biting in my hand. There we go. That's about all it will take. I was beating some kind of particles out of there. And so that's the crux of the issue. One of the other issues with these, and that's why I wanted to demonstrate, is if you have like an extra thick nut, or if it's a nylon lock nut, for some reason those really like to mush around, you'll start running into just physics, which is this wedge starts biting in so deep, if the nut doesn't actually split at that point, you just start running into so much friction that all it does is leave a big indentation, which is a little bit easier to get a chisel on there and turn it, but it doesn't actually like crack it all the way open. And they blunt it so much just because they're trying to make sure it doesn't break. But really, one of the best things you can do is pull this out and actually grind a sharper point on this and just use it a little bit more carefully. Then that sharper point will be able to penetrate deeper, won't be causing quite so much friction because the wedge doesn't really work. And then it's able to drive to the center of the nut and actually get it to separate. And that's all you're trying to do, is get it to crack and separate, not like get it to peel open like an onion. Just to crack it so all the pressure is relieved. Then you can just tap it around a couple of times and maybe even use a normal socket on it at that point, or just a pair of pliers. Anyway, never done a video really about one of these classic and very common nut splitters, so that's why such a simple tool had such a long video. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.